come back to Middle-earth for sleep. Tonight, we journey gently into the ancient world of Tolkien and explore the deep lore that shaped it. Close your eyes, breathe slowly, and let the story carry you across the wide lands of Middle-earth. Feel the gentle release of tension in your shoulders, letting them soften with each slow exhale. Imagine the vast, silent skies above, stretching endlessly over forgotten mountains and ancient forests, places where time itself seems to slow. Like a deep river flowing through stone, we're not seeking grand battles or the clamor of war tonight, but rather the quiet whispers of ages long past, the tales etched not in monuments of kings, but in the very bedrock of the world. Picture yourself standing at the edge of a deep, misty vale, where the air is cool and carries the scent of damp earth and ancient pines. The world around you is old, immeasurably old, and within its profound stillness, secrets lie dormant, waiting for a gentle ear to listen. Tonight, our journey takes us to such a secret place, to a forgotten people whose echoes still resonate through the deepest caverns and most ancient hills of Middle-earth. They were here before many others, carved into the very landscape of Beleriand. Yet their story is often untold, overshadowed by the sagas of elves and men. These were the true first inhabitants of certain wildlands, a reclusive folk whose lives were woven with the stone and shadows long before the great civilizations rose. As you settle deeper into your resting place, allow your mind to drift back through the long millennia, to an era when the world was younger and its mysteries deeper. We journey now to the First Age, a time of myth and wonder, when the elder days unfolded across the vast continent of Beleriand. Envision the towering peaks veiled in eternal cloud, the endless green of ancient forests, and the deep, silent rivers carving their paths through a land untamed. This was a world teeming with life, but also with untold dangers and unexplored depths. In these shadows, a unique strain of dwarves dwelt, distinct from their more renowned kin of the Blue Mountains or the Iron Hills. These were the Nojith-Niben, as the Sindar elves would later call them, the Petty-Dwarves. Let the words themselves settle upon you. Petty-Dwarves, a name imbued with a touch of condescension, perhaps, but also one that hints at their smaller stature, their more ancient, perhaps even more primitive ways compared to the stately Khazad of later ages. They were a people of solitude, their numbers few, their dwellings often mere natural caves or simple burrows expanded with crude tools, hidden deep within the earth. Imagine their forms, squatter, perhaps a little more gnarled than the typical image of dwarves, with beards unkempt and faces weathered by sun and shadow. They were the original tunnelers of Beleriand, not by choice, but by necessity, seeking refuge and sustenance in the very bones of the world. They knew the land in a way few others did. Every whisper of stone, every hidden spring, every secret passage beneath the roots of the mountains. Their existence was a stark, quiet testament to endurance, a testament carved from granite and shadowed by ancient trees. Yet their ancient tenure in Beleriand was not one of peace or unmolested solitude. No, the story of the Petty-Dwarves is steeped in grievance, a long, sorrowful history of misunderstanding and cruel treatment. As the elves, the Eldar, awoke and later journeyed westward. Some tarried in Beleriand, becoming the Sindar. These newcomers, with their fair skin and love of light, were unaware of the Nojith-Niben, who had long roamed beneath the sun and dwelled in the darkness of the earth. To the elves, the Petty-Dwarves were not seen as kin, or even as fellow intelligent beings, but as creatures of the wild. Strange, silent things that scurried through the undergrowth or hid in rocky crevices. They were hunted like beasts, driven from their ancestral homes, their simple lives disrupted by the arrival of the proud, luminous elves. Picture the harsh reality of their existence, perpetually on edge, their deep-set eyes wary and watchful, forever scanning the horizon for the unwelcome glint of an elvish spear. This bitter experience, repeated generation after generation, forged a deep resentment within their hearts, an abiding suspicion of all outsiders, particularly the tall folk. Their history became one of survival through stealth and retreat, a people forced further into the forgotten corners of the world, deepening their isolation and hardening their resolve. It is this profound sense of ancient injury, this inherited sorrow, that we shall gently explore tonight as we uncover the quiet tragedy of the Petty-Dwarves, the first dwarves you never truly knew. Welcome back to Middle-earth for sleep. Tonight, we journey gently into the ancient world of Tolkien and explore the deep lore that shaped it. Close your eyes, breathe slowly, and let the story carry you across the wide lands of Middle-earth. These Petty-Dwarves, the Nojith-Niben, were not newcomers to Beleriand. They were woven into its very fabric, a people older even than the first footsteps of the elves upon its greenswards. Their presence predated the awakening of the Sindar, long before the great halls of Menigroth were carved or the towers of Nargothrond conceived. They were the aboriginal inhabitants among the speaking folk, their rough-hewn burrows and secret caves predating any elven settlement by countless centuries. Their settlements were not the grand, sculpted halls that would later define the dwarf kingdoms of the Blue Mountains, but rather simple extensions of natural caverns or modest burrows dug into hillsides, often concealed by roots and overgrown flora. Their tools were crude, yet effective. Chipped flint axes, rudimentary picks fashioned from hardened wood or rough stone, perfectly suited for the soft soils and softer stones they typically encountered. Their lives were lived close to the earth, cultivating what little could be grown in sheltered nooks, foraging for wild roots and berries, and hunting the small game that frequented the hidden valleys. Family units were small, a handful of kin sharing a dwelling, their days marked by quiet labor and watchful vigilance. They communicated in low murmurs, a guttural language known only to themselves. It sounds as ancient and resonant as the stones they called home. In their hands, the simplest objects became precious, imbued with the weight of generations, each worn tool a testament to their enduring, unhurried passage through time. For long ages, they were the silent keepers of Beleriand's depths, their knowledge of its hidden ways unparalleled. They mapped the subterranean streams and grottos in their minds, memorized the subtle shifts in rock and soil, and sensed the presence of any intruder with an uncanny intuition. Their isolation, a choice born of their very nature, and perhaps the deep-seated memories of dangers from the Far East, meant they had little contact with other beings. Even as other species began to stir in the world, they harbored no ambitions for conquest or grand works, only the desire to live undisturbed, their lives intertwined with the slow pulse of the earth. This deep-rooted solitude, however, was also their vulnerability, for it meant they were few in number and possessed little by way of defense against the changing world. They carried the memory of the land in their bones, an ancient, unbroken lineage stretching back to the earliest twilight of the world, a lineage soon to be tested by the arrival of new peoples. For uncounted ages, this quiet existence persisted until the awakening of the firstborn, the elves, in the Far East. Their long march brought them eventually to the green lands of Beleriand, and with their arrival came a new light, but also a shadow for the ancient folk. The Sindar, led by Elwes and Gallo, were awestruck by the land's beauty, yet knew little of its deepest secrets. They explored the forests and dales, their eyes bright, their voices echoing in places that had known only the low murmurs of the Petty-Dwarves for millennia. It was inevitable their paths would cross. But the elves, unaccustomed to any other speaking race, mistook the slow-moving, silent Petty-Dwarves for animals of a peculiar, squat kind, or perhaps even creatures of a darker origin, spawned from the malice of the Elder King. Ignorance bred fear, and fear in turn begot cruelty. The elves, calling these squat, silent folk Nojith Niben the Petty-Dwarves, or Noggoth the Dwarves, but not yet understanding their true nature, saw them as nothing more than wild, uncouth creatures, perhaps even akin to beasts that scurried in the dark. For many years, before wisdom dawned, the Sindar would hunt them in the wilderness of Beleriand, driving them from their ancient burrows, and sometimes even slaying them. This relentless pursuit forced the Petty-Dwarves deeper into hiding, making them ever more secretive and wary of any light folk. A profound and bitter resentment began to fester within their small, enduring hearts, a grievance born of unprovoked persecution that would be passed down through countless generations. Only much later, when the true dwarves, the Nogrim from the Blue Mountains, came into Beleriand and formed alliances with the Sindar, did the elves begin to understand their grave error. They learned that the Nojith Niben were indeed kinsfolk of the Nogrim, though estranged and diminished. The elves ceased their hunts, but the scars of their initial cruelty ran deep. The Petty-Dwarves, already few in number, were now utterly broken in spirit, their trust in the light folk forever shattered. They retreated into the deepest, most hidden recesses of the land, becoming whispers in the shadows, their numbers dwindling with each passing age, fading slowly from the memory of the wider world, save for the echoes of their ancient, unspoken sorrow. The memory of the relentless pursuit by the tall, light-skinned folk was sharp and unforgiving. It drove the Petty-Dwarves not merely into hiding, but into a deeper communion with the very stone of the earth. They sought out forgotten crevices, ancient cracks, and the deepest, most shadowed hollows, far beneath the roots of the ancient forests. Their pathways became mazes, their entrances concealed with such cunning that only the keenest eye, or perhaps the luckiest foot, might ever stumble upon them. Each step taken was deliberate, each breath held as they moved through the subterranean passages, their world shrinking from the vast green wilds above to the echoing, protective embrace of the rock below. This retreat was not a surrender, but an adaptation, a slow, patient burrowing deeper into their origins, securing their existence within the very heart of Beleriand. Within these secluded depths, their burrows grew not outward, but inward, becoming extensions of the natural caverns they discovered. Unlike the magnificent halls of their distant kin, the petty dwarf dwellings were humble, almost invisible to the untrained eye. They worked with quiet reverence for the stone, shaping it subtly, creating low passages and small, intimate chambers that mimicked the organic forms of the earth itself. Smooth, worn rock faces bore the faint marks of generations of hands, not grand carvings, but a gentle polishing from constant touch. Here, the air was cool and still, often carrying the faint scent of damp earth and ancient rock. Simple hearths offered only a flicker of light, their smoke finding hidden vents to the surface, leaving little trace. Each dwelling was a testament to enduring patience, a secret world built not for display, but for survival. The passage of seasons above ground became an abstract concept, marked only by the shifting dampness in the earth or the subtle changes in the flow of underground streams. Down in their hidden realm, time seemed to slow, weaving itself into the very fabric of their existence. The deep-seated resentment against the light folk was not forgotten. It became a quiet, constant hum beneath their daily lives, shaping their customs and their oral traditions. Children were taught vigilance from their earliest days, learning the silent ways of movement and the secrets of concealment. The sound of any unfamiliar voice, or the faintest hint of light from an unexpected source, would send a shiver of ancient fear through their small communities. Their tales spoke of a distant time when the surface was safe, but those were fading whispers against the stark reality of their shadowed present. A present defined by the need to remain unseen, unheard, and unmolested. The incessant need for silence, for invisibility, gradually reshaped the Petty-Dwarves themselves. Their small frames, already nimble, became even more adept at melting into the shadows. Their footsteps, once merely quiet, evolved into a hushed glide, barely disturbing the dust of ages on the cavern floors. What was once merely caution became an instinct, a second nature, woven into the very fabric of their being. They learned to listen not just with their ears, but with their entire bodies, sensing the subtle shifts in air currents, the faintest vibrations through the stone, the distant echoes that bespoke of elven patrols above. This heightened awareness, born of perpetual flight, allowed them to perceive their hidden world with a clarity few others could ever achieve, making them masters of their subterranean domain. Able to navigate its deepest secrets with uncanny precision. To protect their sanctuaries, the Petty-Dwarves wove intricate webs of deception into the very structure of their entrances. No simple door, no obvious path led to their true homes. Instead, they crafted elaborate false passages, dead ends that opened only onto sheer rock faces, and cunningly concealed portals that appeared as nothing more than natural cracks or boulder formations. Moss and lichen, carefully cultivated, further obscured their secret thresholds, blending them seamlessly with the raw, untamed earth. These were not the grand, carved gates of their distant kin, but subtle, organic mimicries of nature's own haphazard artistry, designed to mislead and deter even the most persistent and keen-eyed of their pursuers, securing their desperate, hidden existence through sheer ingenuity and patient labor. Yet, despite their cunning and resilience, the relentless hunting took its toll. Their numbers dwindled with each passing generation, each disappearance a stark reminder of their precarious existence. The laughter that echoed in their low chambers grew softer. The songs of their ancestors whispered more often as laments than as joyous tales. A deep, quiet melancholy settled upon their hearts, a shared sorrow for those lost, and for the ever-present threat that shadowed their lives. This constant threat bred not only caution, but also a profound and bitter resentment, slowly solidifying into an ancient grievance against the tall, light-skinned folk who had driven them from the surface lands they had first claimed and hunted them to the very edges of existence. Their unique culture was shaped by this loss, forever marked by the scars of abandonment and fear. Beyond the ingeniously concealed entrances, the true heart of the Petty-Dwarves' domain lay in vast, intricate cave systems. These were not the grand, hewn halls of their later kin, but often natural caverns, widened and adapted with patient, unassuming labor. The air within was still, cool, and carried the subtle scent of damp earth and ancient rock. Within these quiet spaces, life continued in a perpetual twilight, illuminated by the soft luminescence of phosphorescent mosses and carefully shielded hearths. These were places of simple, sturdy living, where every fissure and crevice was known and utilized, every natural advantage observed and integrated into their hidden existence. Their dwellings were not about grandeur, but about survival and concealment, carved with a quiet reverence for the deep earth that sheltered them. They learned to coax sustenance from the depths, cultivating fungi that thrived in eternal shadow and hunting the elusive, pale creatures of the underworld. Their hands, though small, were immensely strong and adept at the slow, deliberate work of shaping stone and wood. Tools were fashioned with practical purpose from flint, hardened bone, and rare, tough woods found clinging to the cave mouths or carried in by subterranean rivers. There were no elaborate carvings of ancient kings or mighty battles, but rather simple, symbolic etchings on the cave walls, winding paths, the faint outlines of animals, or abstract patterns that spoke of the earth's deep currents and their journey beneath it. These quiet acts of creation were not for display, but for remembrance, for connection, and for the simple, enduring beauty found in the most unassuming materials. Their culture was etched into the rock with patience, a testament to their long, solitary wanderings. Navigation through these vast, often unstable labyrinthine passages was an instinct born of countless generations spent below the surface. They did not rely on maps drawn on parchment, but on a deep, almost mystical knowledge of the stone itself, the subtle shifts in mineral veins, the temperature of a particular rock face, the faint, resonant echoes of underground rivers. These were their guides. A network of almost invisible trails, smoothed by untold years of bare feet, crisscrossed their domains, allowing them to move silently and swiftly through the perpetual gloom. Each petty dwarf carried within them a living map of their realm, a memory of every twist, turn, and hidden passage, ensuring their survival and continuing their unbroken connection to the very heart of Middle-earth. While most petty dwarves remained nameless in the histories of the elves, the memory of Mim persisted, a faint but steady echo through the centuries. He was one of the last of his kind to bear a name remembered beyond their hidden enclaves, a solitary figure whose quiet countenance held the weight of ages. His eyes, though keen, often seemed lost in the shadows of the past, contemplating the slow fade of his people and the injustices they had endured. He carried not only the lore of his forebears, but also the bitter sting of ancient slights, passed down through generations of whispered tales. Deep within the most ancient chambers, Mim would sometimes trace the faint, smooth curves of a stone bowl, a vessel not merely functional, but imbued with a subtle, almost imperceptible artistry, unlike the grand, sharp angles of the greater dwarves' work. This piece spoke of a patient hand that understood the rock's natural grain, coaxing its form rather than imposing upon it. It was a tangible link to a time when their crafts, though humble, were distinct and refined, before the shadows of their decline had truly settled. Each polished surface seemed to hold the silent stories of a people who once knew their place under the earth, unchallenged and unburdened by the scorn of others. These quiet artifacts and the deep-seated lore carried within Mim's memory often brought forth the oldest and most painful of their grievances, the coming of the elves. Long before the Sindar built their forest realms, or the Noldor sailed from the west, the Petty-Dwarves had already traversed Beleriand, charting its hidden depths and dwelling in its ancient hills. They were the first, the true inhabitants of many lands later claimed by others. The elves, in their radiant youth and pride, had failed to recognize these ancient dwellers, deeming them mere animals, beasts of the wild to be hunted, rather than intelligent beings with their own deep-rooted history. This profound misunderstanding, this cruel dismissal, was the core of their lasting bitterness. Mim's weathered fingers, tracing the smooth arc of the ancient stone bowl, often paused, suspended over an invisible map of memory. It was not merely the loss of their distinctive craft that weighed upon him, but the slow, grinding dispossession of their very earth. He remembered the whispered tales of Amun-Rud, the lonely hill, a place that was once more than a refuge. It was their heart, their truest home, long before any elf set foot upon its slopes. For generations, his ancestors had delved into its stony embrace, not with grand designs, but with a deep understanding of the rock's breath, shaping its hollows into simple, enduring shelters. This hill, unassuming to the casual eye, was to them a fortress of quiet belonging, a sanctuary against the growing chill of a world that seemed increasingly unwelcoming. Its memory, passed down through silent glances and the subtle teaching of stone, was a living wound in Mim's ancient heart. Amun-Rud, in those elder days, was a place of quiet strength, a great, solitary hummock rising starkly from the surrounding plains. Unlike the soaring peaks of the Blue Mountains, it was a modest eminence, yet its rocky slopes contained a network of natural caverns, which the Petty-Dwarves, with their patient hands, slowly expanded and connected. They did not carve grand halls or delve for glittering gems, but instead sought practical shelter, chambers where the earth's cool embrace offered constant refuge. The entrances to their dwellings were often cunningly concealed, appearing as nothing more than weathered crevices or overgrown hollows, known only to those who truly understood the language of the stone. Here, life unfolded in a rhythm attuned to the deep earth, a slow dance of foraging, crafting, and quiet watchfulness, their simple tools shaping the rock to serve their needs without marring its inherent beauty. Then came the Eldar, the elves, across the wide lands of Beleriand, their light bright and their voices clear, utterly unlike the silent, shadowed ways of the Petty-Dwarves. It was Finrod Felagund, Noldorin Lord, who, seeking a place for a mighty stronghold, chanced upon Amen-Rud. He perceived the hill's strategic value and the hidden caverns within, though he knew not their ancient occupants. For the Petty-Dwarves, who had learned to distrust all outsiders, the arrival of these tall, graceful folk was a profound disturbance. They watched from hidden crannies, their hearts heavy with foreboding. Though Finrod sought a great city, Nargothrond, he found their ancient tunnels and drove the last of the Petty-Dwarves from their long-held abode. It was a displacement born of ignorance and a lack of care rather than malice, but to Mim's ancestors, it was a profound betrayal, the first of many such bitter blows, forcing them into ever deeper, darker retreats. The quiet life of the Petty-Dwarves within Amen-Rud and in similar hidden strongholds across Beleriand was shattered by the coming of the elves. The elder children, newly awakened and radiating a grace unknown to the earthbound Khazad, beheld the ancient lands with fresh eyes. They were accustomed to the sprawling forests and shimmering rivers, and their perception of life was often intertwined with their own radiant presence. To them, the reclusive Nojath Niben, short and hunched, scurrying through the undergrowth or peeking from concealed crevices, were strange, dark creatures, almost like animals. These first encounters were marked by confusion and fear, for the elves, in their pride and ignorance of any beings besides themselves and the beasts, often mistook the silent, watchful Petty-Dwarves for forest creatures to be hunted, or even worse, for shadowy things of the enemy. The memory of those initial hunts was a particularly sharp splinter in the heart of Mim and his kin. The elves, swift and keen-eyed, perceived only fleeting glimpses of small, dark forms, often believing them to be particularly cunning and elusive beasts. Their arrows, intended for game, sometimes found their mark in the unsuspecting Petty-Dwarves, driving them deeper into the earth, instilling a profound terror and a growing resentment. What the elves saw as a sport or a clearing of wildlands, the Petty-Dwarves experienced as an unprovoked assault on their very existence, a violent eviction from the surface lands that had been theirs for countless ages. The very sound of an elven horn, once a strange echo in the wilds, became a harbinger of fear and a symbol of their dispossession, forcing them to to refine their already expert skills of concealment and silent movement, forever adapting to a life of shadows. This constant threat from the new arrivals forged a deeper resolve in the hearts of the Petty-Dwarves. They began to abandon their more open, sun-kissed dwellings, retreating further into the sunless depths of the earth. Their tunnels grew more intricate, their hidden passages more cunning, becoming a labyrinth known only to their own kind. The surface, once a place of foraging and quiet observation, became a dangerous borderland, to be traversed only under the cloak of deepest night, or within the densest thickets. Every new rock carving, every expanded cavern, was not merely shelter, but a defiant act of survival, a silent testament to their enduring presence against the encroaching world. Their culture, once subtly distinct, now hardened into an even more secretive and distrustful form. Their grievances against the fair folk deepening. With each forced retreat, the Petty-Dwarves carried within them a wisdom born of the deep earth itself, a knowledge of stone unlike any other. Long before the great delves of the Iron Hills or the mighty halls of Khazad-dûm, the Nojith Niben moved through Beleriand. Sensing the very pulse of the rock, they knew where the veins of unyielding granite lay hidden, where the softest shale could be found for intricate carvings, and which stones held warmth or shimmered faintly in the gloom. Their tools were often simple, fashioned from flint or hardened wood, yet with them they coaxed secrets from the earth that even the skilled Noldoran smiths later struggled to replicate. They did not merely carve, they listened, allowing the stone to reveal its inherent form. This ancient art, passed down through whispers and tactile teaching across uncounted generations, was a silent symphony between the hand and the earth, a primal connection to Arda's deepest strata that faded with their dwindling numbers, becoming a forgotten echo in the stone. Beyond their understanding of stone, the Petty-Dwarves possessed an intimate, almost instinctive knowledge of the land itself. They were the original pathfinders, long before any elven feet trod the hidden ways. They knew of every forgotten spring, every sheltered hollow, every ancient tree whose roots held medicinal properties, and every subtle shift in the wind that heralded changes in weather or the approach of strangers. Their lives depended on this acute awareness, honed by millennia of solitude and survival. They could read the land like an open book, discerning paths invisible to others, finding sustenance where none seemed to exist, and disappearing into the very fabric of Beleriand's wildlands with a silent grace that spoke not of magic, but of profound, deep-rooted wisdom. This lore, never written, never taught to outsiders, was a living tapestry woven into the land itself, accessible only to their kind. And with their retreat, it began to fray, its threads slowly unraveling into myth. Within their concealed delves, the Petty-Dwarves safeguarded yet another form of their secret knowledge, a rudimentary language of signs and simple markings. These were not the sophisticated Cirth of Daron, nor the elaborate runes of later dwarven script, but ancient, almost pictographic symbols etched onto stone or bark. They served as warnings, territorial markers, or perhaps as mnemonic aids for their most basic lore, telling tales of hunting grounds, safe passages, or the presence of hostile beings. Only their kin understood these subtle clues, which often blended seamlessly with the natural patterns of rock and root. A series of notches, a specific arrangement of pebbles, or a faint scratch on a tree could convey a wealth of information to a discerning petty dwarf. This was a silent tongue, a forgotten script of survival that underscored their deep connection to the wild, a testament to their long, isolated history that would eventually vanish from the memory of Middle-earth, leaving only weathered, incomprehensible marks for those few who might stumble upon them. The elves, attuned to the visible world, had often overlooked the subtle signs woven into the fabric of Beleriand by the petty dwarves. But on this occasion, deep within a sun-dappled glade, a hunting party of Sindar found themselves disoriented, their usual forest wisdom failing them in a patch of unusually dense, ancient trees. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor beneath their feet, a shift in the scent of damp earth, hinted at a presence they could not place. From a concealed fissure in the rock, two small, dark eyes watched them with an intensity that held neither outright hostility nor fear, but a profound, ancient caution. This was not the panicked darting away they usually saw, but a still, unwavering gaze that held a flicker of something new. Assessment. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath, a silent arbiter between two disparate peoples, poised at the precipice of an unspoken moment. A low, guttural growl echoed through the glade, not of any known beast, but something older, more primal, perhaps one of the lesser creatures stirred by Morgoth's nascent malice from the north. The elves, though skilled, were suddenly on edge, their weapons raised, but their faces etched with a dawning fear. They were too far from the open woods, too entangled in the snaking roots and shadowed hollows to move swiftly. It was then that a subtle, almost imperceptible hand motion from within the fissure caught the eye of the lead Sindar hunter, a gesture not of aggression, but of direction, pointing silently towards a barely visible, narrow cleft in the stone wall, a passage hidden to their eyes. This silent offer, born of the petty dwarves' intimate knowledge of the earth, was a desperate chance, a stark choice between trusting the unknown or facing the rising dread alone. With a shared glance of reluctant acceptance, the Sindar made their decision. The lead hunter nodded almost imperceptibly, lowering his bow slightly as he moved towards the barely discernible crack in the stone. The unseen threat seemed to circle them, its growls growing closer, urging haste. As the first elf squeezed into the narrow opening, a deep sense of vulnerability settled upon them, trusting their lives to the guidance of beings they had long despised. Within, the air grew cool and damp, and though it was dark, the faintest glow of phosphorescent moss guided their steps along a winding, low passage, carved with simple, ancient tools. The Petty-Dwarves, leading from the front with silent surety, brought them not to a grand hall, but a small, dry chamber, just large enough to offer temporary refuge from the encroaching darkness and the unseen menace without. The lead Sindar hunter, named Phaler, paused for a long, silent moment, his gaze fixed on the narrow cleft. The primal growl, though distant now, still resonated in the deep roots of his memory. He weighed the unknown against the palpable dread of the unseen threat lurking in the glade. With a slow, deliberate nod to his companions, Phaler made his choice. Relief, stark and sudden, mingled with a profound apprehension as he turned, sheathing his bow, and began to move cautiously towards the hidden passage. The air around the cleft felt cooler, tinged with the scent of deep earth and ancient stone, promising a sanctuary that might also be a deeper trap. His companions, seasoned trackers of the forest, followed his lead, their movements quiet and watchful, their trust in his wisdom absolute even in this bewildering moment. Entering the passage was like stepping into a different world, a sudden severing from the vibrant life of the forest. The light from the glade diminished rapidly, swallowed by the twisting, uneven rock walls. The air grew still and cool, heavy with the scent of mineral and damp earth, a stark contrast to the fresh, green fragrance they had known. The passage was narrow, requiring them to stoop, and their finely crafted bows scraped softly against the rough stone. This was no grand, high-arched hall, but a constricted, almost organic path, seemingly carved by patience more than by purposeful design. The marks on the stone were crude, not the precise, geometric cuts of the greater dwarves, but rounded, almost eroded impressions that spoke of an unimaginable antiquity and simple, hard-won labor. As they moved deeper, the passage twisted again, and Phaler felt a subtle shift beneath his boots, a slight decline into the earth's embrace. Here, on the rough, uneven stone, faint markings became discernible, catching the scarce, ambient light that seemed to filter through the very stone itself. These were not the elegant spirals or intricate patterns of elven script, nor the bold, angular runes of the iron-fist dwarves they had heard tales of. Instead, they were simple, almost childlike scratchings, primitive symbols etched with rudimentary tools, telling silent stories of a people whose very existence had been almost erased from elven memory. It was a language of the earliest ages, hinting at forgotten grievances, and a deep-seated connection to the very bones of Beleriand. Preceding even the coming of the Eldar to these shores, the passage deepened, the air growing heavier with the scent of ancient earth and the profound silence of forgotten millennia. Each step Phalar and his companions took echoed faintly, swallowed almost immediately by the dense stone, a sound far different from the living rustle of the forest above. Here, in the subterranean veins of the world, lingered the palpable essence of those who had first carved these simple ways: the Petty-Dwarves, the Nojith-Niben. Their grievances, born of millennia of misunderstanding and cruel dismissal, seemed to seep from the very rock walls, a quiet, lingering sorrow for generations beyond count. They had retreated, not by choice, but by the relentless press of the Noldor's arrival, then the Sindar's disdain. Their lives had been a continuous slow relinquishing of the surface world, a quiet journey deeper into the earth that was their only true sanctuary. Imagine them now, not as figures of fear or scorn, but as shadows in the deep earth, their crude tools scraping patiently, not for glory or vast hoards, but for simple survival. Their knowledge of the earth, born of necessity and intimacy, was their greatest treasure and their only defense. They understood the whispers of the stone, the hidden veins of water, the subtle tremors that spoke of shifts in the world above. It was this ancient wisdom, an instinct honed over ages, that guided Phalar now, a wisdom grudgingly shared, born of a desperate mutual need. The path ahead was dark, yet held a strange, comforting promise, a quiet cessation of the immediate threat, replaced by the profound stillness of an age long past, where the Petty-Dwarves had walked in solitary communion with the earth, their hearts heavy with the weight of their world, their voices hushed by ages of sorrow. As Phalar and his companions ventured further, the silence deepened, becoming less a void and more a presence, a quiet guardian of lost memories. The very air seemed to hum with the untold stories of the Nojith-Niben, their first migrations, their shy encounters with the earliest elves, the heartbreaking shift from wary coexistence to outright rejection. Their tragedy was not one of epic battles lost, but of slow, steady erasure from the grand narratives, a quiet fading into the shadowed corners of history. They were the first to delve, the original dwellers. Yet they were destined to become the forgotten, their innovations adopted, their warnings unheeded, their very existence often denied by those who came after. Their ancient grievances, once sharp and piercing, had softened with the passage of ages, settling into the bedrock of Middle-earth itself. A quiet sorrow woven into the very fabric of the mountains. The passage eventually widened, revealing not a grand chamber, but a series of interconnected, low-ceilinged grottos, each bearing the simple, worn signs of long-abandoned life. Here, a hearth long cold; there, a shelf of unadorned stone. No treasures glittered, no grand carvings proclaimed their might. Only the humble evidence of lives lived in quiet endurance. It was a testament to their philosophy: survival through subtlety, strength in stillness, a profound understanding that the earth would outlast all superficial glories. Their path into the deep earth was, in a way, their final testament, a choice to merge with the very essence of their home, becoming one with the quiet, enduring stone. Their physical forms might have faded, their voices long stilled, but their spirit, their patient, enduring connection to the deep roots of Middle-earth, still gently whispers to those who listen closely, a lullaby of ancient sorrow and ultimate peace. And so, the journey through the forgotten world of the Petty-Dwarves draws to a gentle close. Their ancient grievances, once a sharp edge of sorrow, now settle into the vast, quiet memory of Middle-earth, like sediment in a still, deep lake. We leave Phalar and his companions within the embrace of that ancient quietude, their immediate threat averted, their understanding of the world deepened by the silent wisdom of the Nojeth Niben. Their desperate choice, born of fear, led them not into a trap of treachery, but into the profound, enduring stillness of the earth, a stillness that cradled the last echoes of a forgotten people. The primal growl of the glade recedes, replaced by the deep, consistent pulse of the world's ancient heart. In this deep quiet, amidst the worn stone and the cool, steady breath of the earth, we find a different kind of peace. It is the peace of knowing that even the most overlooked stories, the most unsung tragedies, hold their own profound truth and beauty. The Petty-Dwarves, in their quiet retreat, became part of the very fabric of the world, their spirit woven into the dark veins of the mountains, a silent, enduring presence. As their tales now fade into the quiet currents of your own thoughts, let this profound stillness envelop you. Allow the deep, calm memory of Middle-earth to settle around you, easing any lingering worries, cradling you in its ancient, protective embrace. The vast, starry sky above, the deep, dark earth beneath, both hold countless such stories, waiting for a quiet mind to wander through their echoes. Close your eyes now and rest, held by the gentle, profound quietude of a world rich with forgotten lore. Sleep well, wanderer of Middle-earth. The faint paths within the low-ceilinged grottos, once worn smooth by countless small feet, began to soften, blurring into the natural rock and earth. A thin film of dust, disturbed only by the gentle air currents, settled over the crude stone shelves and abandoned hearths. The last flickering torch glow had long since died, leaving the deep darkness to reclaim these quiet spaces where only the memory of their presence remained. The very earth, in its slow, patient way, began to draw their humble works back into itself, erasing the precise lines of their shaping. Outside, where the grotto entrances once nestled shyly into the hillsides, new brambles and resilient mosses crept across the rough-hewn lintels, slowly obscuring the openings. The elves, in their occasional wanderings through Beleriand, might stumble upon such a hidden fissure in the rock, but their keen eyes, accustomed to grander works of elven and true dwarven craft, would dismiss them as mere animal burrows or natural formations. Their understanding, focused on their own kin and the larger realms, could no longer connect these humble signs to the industrious, if ostracized, folk who had once called them home. Their names, even their very kind, began to slip from the longer memories of the Eldar. Eventually, even the most persistent tales of the Petty-Dwarves became whispers too faint to be heard, mere echoes in the vast, echoing halls of Middle-earth's past. The deep earth, their ultimate sanctuary and the source of their enduring strength, had fully embraced them. No longer were they a separate folk, to be scorned or forgotten, but an intrinsic, foundational part of the ancient landscape itself. Their quiet sorrow and patient wisdom were now woven irrevocably into the very stone and soil, a silent layer beneath the grand narratives of kings and wars, a lullaby of ancient sorrow and ultimate peace that only the most attuned spirits could still perceive. The Eldar, with their long memories stretching back to the awakening by Cuavanan's waters, simply overlooked the ancient presence of the Petty-Dwarves, or Nojith, Niben, as they came to be known. Their own arrival in Beleriand, though momentous to them, was not the first stirring of sentient life in its deep places. Long before the Noldor ever dreamt of sailing west, or the Sindar began to shape their woodland realms, the Petty-Dwarves had already delved their humble burrows and established their quiet, solitary lives beneath the forested hills. Their history was older, rooted deeper in the raw earth, a claim to the land that went unspoken and unacknowledged by the taller, more radiant newcomers. This profound disconnect in time and experience laid the groundwork for the misunderstandings and the grievances that would slowly, inexorably unfold. The first encounters between the wandering elves and these reclusive, lesser dwarves were often fraught with fear and misinterpretation. To the elves, accustomed to the elegant forms of nature and their own refined crafts, the Petty-Dwarves appeared squat, unkempt, and wild, their crude tools and simple dwellings akin to those of beasts rather than thinking folk. The Petty-Dwarves, for their part, saw the elves as tall, swift shadows, often glimpsed only briefly before they vanished, but sometimes close enough to mistake for predators. They were the original dwellers of the gloom, wary of all that was new and bright, especially creatures of the surface world who moved with such alarming grace and speed. This initial wariness, born of fundamental differences, slowly curdled into deep-seated distrust and fear on both sides. The elves, particularly the Sindar who were the first to truly settle Beleriand, were fierce protectors of their nascent realms. When they encountered these smaller, stealthy folk, emerging unexpectedly from the earth. Their initial reaction was often one of hostility. They mistook the Petty-Dwarves for a species of cunning animals, or perhaps even foul creatures of Morgoth. Given their dark, earth-stained appearance and preference for the deep, the hunting of the Petty-Dwarves began not out of malice, but out of ignorance and a protective instinct. A tragic chapter where many were slain, hunted down like beasts. This period etched an indelible scar upon the collective memory of the Nojith-Niben, transforming their natural reclusiveness into a profound ancestral bitterness, solidifying their deep-seated grievances against the encroaching elves and all surface dwellers. The elves, accustomed to the elegant forms of nature and their own refined crafts, often mistook the reclusive Petty-Dwarves for strange, elusive creatures of the wild, rather than sentient folk. Their squat forms, often seen darting through the undergrowth at twilight, were easily confused with wild beasts, especially as the Petty-Dwarves themselves chose to avoid open confrontation, retreating swiftly from any glimpse of the tall, luminous newcomers. This initial misidentification, born of ignorance rather than malice, gradually seeded a dangerous perception among the Eldar. They spoke of night prowlers and cave dwellers, assigning to these beings a primal, unthinking nature, very different from the noble beasts of the forest they respected. The very notion of their dwellings, simple burrows dug into hillsides, only reinforced this mistaken belief. Far removed from the graceful flets of the Sindar, or the grand halls that the Noldor would later dream of, it was a failure of understanding, a chasm of cultural difference that would soon widen into something far more cruel. As the Sindar elves spread through Beleriand, charting its forests and valleys, their encounters with the Petty-Dwarves became more frequent and more aggressive. The early, tentative curiosity of the elves turned to annoyance, then to a hardened conviction that these Nojith-Niben, the Petty-Dwarves, were mere animals, dangerous and sly, best driven from their lands, or worse, hunted without true malice, but born of profound ignorance and a sense of entitlement to the land they now claimed. Hunting parties were occasionally formed. These hunts were not sport, but rather a grim task, intended to clear what they perceived as vermin from their burgeoning territories. The Petty-Dwarves, small and slow compared to the swift elves, possessed no great strength or magical arts to defend themselves in open combat. Their only true defense was their knowledge of the earth, their ability to disappear into its hidden folds, and their inherent aversion to the light of day. With each encounter, each chase through the moonlit woods, each forced retreat into the deepest burrows, the Petty-Dwarves' fear of the elves solidified into a profound, ancestral terror. They learned to shun all light, preferring the deepest gloom of the earth and the twilight hours, where their squat forms and keen night vision gave them some small advantage against their taller pursuers. Their already reclusive nature intensified, becoming an ingrained instinct for survival. They spoke of the elves as the night stalkers, or tall shadows, beings of overwhelming power and speed who brought only fear and displacement. Their small communities, once spread more widely, now clustered in the most inaccessible caves and forgotten delves, seeking refuge from the relentless, if often unintentional, pressure of the newcomers. This era etched a wound upon their collective memory, a deep-seated grievance against the elves that would never truly heal. The hunting parties of the Sindar, for all their speed and keen senses, often found themselves baffled. The Petty-Dwarves, though slow in open ground, possessed an uncanny knack for vanishing. They knew the ancient earth of Beleriand as intimately as a child knows its mother's embrace. With silent, practiced movements, they would melt into the shadows of tangled roots, slip through narrow fissures in rock faces, or simply seem to become one with the stony ground. Their burrows were not mere holes. They were elaborate, cleverly disguised entrances to a network of tunnels and chambers, known only to their kind. The earth itself became their shield, whispering its secrets only to them, guiding them through forgotten passages where the light of the sun never dared to tread. To the bewildered elves, it was as if the very hills swallowed their prey whole, leaving no trace but the lingering scent of damp earth. Deep within the living rock, where the air was cool and still, the Petty-Dwarves had carved out their existence. Their dwellings were not grand halls of polished stone, but humble, rough-hewn chambers, shaped by generations of patient toil. Low ceilings, smoothed by centuries of passage, kept the damp chill at bay, while small, carefully tended hearths offered a warm glow. Here, they lived a life of quiet industry, their crude tools fashioned with an ingenuity born of necessity. Stone picks and hammers, flint knives, and bone awls lay alongside simple wooden bowls and woven baskets made from tough subterranean fungi. They mined for rudimentary ores, crafting strong, if unadorned, implements. This hidden life was not merely an escape. It was their natural state, their birthright. For the Petty-Dwarves had been in Beleriand long before the first elves awoke by Cuivenin, long before the stars shone clear over Middle-earth. Their ancestors had delved these lands when the world was young, when only the deepest roots of mountains were known to living things. They considered themselves the true firstcomers, the ancient guardians of the earth. The sudden appearance of the tall, bright elves, who claimed the sunlit forests and valleys as their own, was seen not as a new dawn, but as an intrusion, a profound disrespect for the long-held territories of their people. This deep-seated grievance simmered beneath their quiet existence, a low, burning ember in the heart of their ancient culture. They held no malice for the elves as individuals, but viewed their presence, their constant encroachment, as an ongoing act of trespass against a lineage far older than any elven memory. The Petty-Dwarves, in their shadowed abodes, found purpose in every scrap of their environment. The crude tools they forged from flint and the rudimentary ores they unearthed were but the foundation of their ingenuity. From the tenacious roots that pushed through the rock, they wove strong, supple baskets for gathering subterranean fungi, which served as both sustenance and, when dried, a primitive building material. The faintest luminescence of phosphorescent moss, carefully cultivated in niches, cast a soft, ethereal glow, allowing them to tend to their quiet tasks. The air, though damp and cool, often carried the faint, rhythmic tap-tap of a stone pick against rock, or the whisper of fibers being worked into something useful, a testament to their patient, resilient industry deep within the earth. Beyond their immediate needs, the Petty-Dwarves held a connection to the very rock of Beleriand that surpassed mere habitation. It was a profound, almost instinctual bond, honed over countless generations. They did not merely dig tunnels. They listened to the earth's heartbeat, discerning the subtle tremors that spoke of shifts in the deep, the faint whispers of underground rivers, and the rich veins of ore hidden within the stony embrace. Their hands, gnarled and strong, would often rest upon the cool, ancient stone, feeling its vibrations, interpreting its silent wisdom. This was their truest defense, their deepest solace, the earth itself, an ancient mentor, whispering secrets only to its forgotten children, guiding them through passages known to no other living creature. Yet, for all their ingenuity and profound connection to the earth, the shadow of loneliness and decline crept through their quiet lives. Their numbers were few, each family a small island in the vast, silent dark. The constant threat of elven hunting parties, though often eluded, cast a long, chilling shadow over their existence, forcing them ever deeper, ever more reclusive. Their gatherings were hushed, their voices low, as if fearing that even sound might betray their hidden existence. Each passing generation saw their world shrink further, their once broad kinship dwindling into isolated pockets. They became, by necessity and sorrow, the forgotten, their deep-set grievances against the faster, brighter world above growing like roots in the dark earth, unseen but ever present. Welcome back to Middle-earth for sleep. Tonight, we journey gently into the ancient world of Tolkien and explore the deep lore that shaped it. Close your eyes, breathe slowly, and let the story carry you across the wide lands of Middle-earth. Yet these silent dwellers, those who felt the earth's pulse beneath their gnarled hands, were known in the ancient tongue of the Grey Elves as the Nojith-Niben, the Petty-Dwarves. They were indeed the very first of their kind to venture west across the Blue Mountains. Long before the great dwarf kingdoms of Khazad-dûm or Nogrod were even dreamt of. They were the pioneers, the solitary vanguard, carving out their meager existence in the wild, untamed lands of Beleriand, deep within the shadows of the Erd Luin, even before the sun had first risen. Unlike the sturdy, mail-clad dwarves of later ages, the Petty-Dwarves were shorter, squatter, and often darker of skin, with unkempt beards that tangled with the dust and damp of their earthen homes. Their eyes, accustomed to perpetual twilight, held a keen, watchful glint, ever alert to the subtle shifts in the rock and the unseen movements of the wild. They lived in profound isolation, mastering the art of invisibility within their own environment. They knew every secret passage, every hidden cleft, and every forgotten tunnel in the western lands, far better than any elf or man would ever come to know them. These hidden paths were not merely routes, they were extensions of their being, carved with patience and instinct over centuries, connecting their scattered, unassuming abodes. Their culture was one of quiet endurance and deep respect for the stone that sheltered them. While they had no grand halls or vaulted cities, their simple caves, meticulously carved and shaped over generations, were sanctuaries of survival. They etched crude runes and symbols onto the rock, not for display, but as ancient markers of lineage, tales of successful hunts, or warnings of deep perils. These were their histories, their only libraries, read by touch and memory in the dim light. They were the very first intelligent folk encountered by the Quendi, the elves, when the Eldar first awoke and began their great journey west. Though the elves knew it not, in those twilight years of the world, long before the Sindar dwelt in the forests of Beleriand, the Petty-Dwarves already called these deep places home, their presence as integral to the land as the ancient roots of the trees above their dwellings. Unlike the towering, gem-studded cities that the later dwarves would hew from the heart of mountains, were modest, almost indistinguishable from the natural landscape. They were not designed for grandeur, but for utility, for stealth, and for profound communion with the very stone that birthed them. A simple fissure, a cleverly disguised pile of rocks, or a curtain of moss might conceal an entrance, opening into chambers that were more womb than hall. Within these earthen sanctuaries, the air hung still and cool, carrying the faint, clean scent of damp stone and ancient soil. Here, they fashioned their crude tools of flint and sharpened horn, and painstakingly worked the few simple metals they found near the surface: copper and tin. Never the deep veins of silver or gold that would tempt their kin in the east. Their lives were a quiet, ceaseless meditation on survival, their needs few, their movements deliberate and soft, barely disturbing the dust motes dancing in the rare shafts of light that pierced their hidden world. They understood the language of the shifting earth, the deep, resonant hum of the rock, and the subtle murmurs of underground springs, guiding them to sources of water and the sparse, edible roots that sustained their solitary existence, though lacking the sophisticated smithcraft and monumental architecture of the great dwarf kingdoms that would rise much later. The Petty-Dwarves possessed an artistry all their own. It was a craft born of necessity and intimacy with the raw materials of their environment. They sculpted not with hammer and chisel for grand effect, but with patience and gentle hands, coaxing forms from living rock, making vessels from hardened clay, and weaving tough roots into surprisingly intricate baskets. Their greatest skill, however, lay in their almost supernatural ability to merge with their surroundings. They could move through the tangled undergrowth or along rugged cliff faces with a silence that rivaled the falling dew, their figures seemingly dissolving into the patterns of shadow and light. This was not merely stealth. It was an innate understanding of natural camouflage, a deep ancestral memory of how to exist unseen, an essential defense in a world teeming with larger, often hostile creatures, and later, the first wary glances of the elves. For uncounted years, this quiet existence persisted, undisturbed by the grand movements of the wider world. Then came a shift in the ancient rhythms of Beleriand, a change heralded not by the earth's deep tremors, but by unfamiliar songs carried on the wind and the soft tread of light-footed beings. The elves, the firstborn, had awakened by the waters of Cuvenen and begun their slow, westward journey across the continent. When they first entered Beleriand, crossing the Erd-Lewin, they encountered creatures unlike any they had known. The Petty-Dwarves, accustomed to the deep twilight, mistook these tall, shining beings for shadows, for beasts of the forest, or even for some new, curious breed of orc. For the Valor had not yet revealed the true forms of the Avari, or the nature of Khazad. The elves, in turn, with their keen eyesight and quick judgments, saw only furtive, squat figures, moving silently in the shadows, their forms seeming to vanish and reappear without warning. The quietude of their deep tunnels was eventually stirred by a new presence upon the surface. Across the ancient forests of Beleriand, a different light began to glimmer, not of sun or moon alone, but of the Eldar, the elves, who had at last awoken and journeyed west. The Petty-Dwarves, accustomed to the low thrum of the earth and the muted greens of the undergrowth, watched from concealed vantage points as these tall, fair beings moved with a grace and swiftness utterly alien to their own deliberate pace. The elves' forms seemed almost to shimmer with an inner luminescence, their voices like flowing water, and their dwellings open to the sky, a stark contrast to the hidden, rock-bound existence of the Nojith Niben. A deep, unsettling fear, an ancestral memory of larger, predatory creatures, stirred within the Petty-Dwarves at the sight of these bright, swift newcomers. even before any ill intent was shown, they drew back, deeper into the embracing shadows, convinced that these splendid beings could only mean disruption, or worse, danger, for the newly arrived elves, especially the Sindar who were the first to settle Beleriand. The Petty-Dwarves were a perplexing enigma. Moving slowly, often on all fours through dense undergrowth, their crude, earthy appearance and unkempt forms were unlike any beast the elves had ever encountered. Yet they lacked the clear sentience and grace that the Eldar recognized in themselves and the beasts they befriended. The elves, in their youthful ignorance of the world's true diversity, mistook the Nojith Niben for cunning, albeit slow-witted forest animals, or perhaps even a strange, troublesome breed of goblinkin. This grave misunderstanding led to tragic consequences. Seeing them as nuisances or potential threats to their new settlements, the elves began to hunt the Petty-Dwarves, driving them from their forest haunts with bows and spears. The sound of elven laughter, bright and carefree, often accompanied the chase, a sound that would forever be etched into the memory of the Petty-Dwarves as a cruel mockery of their desperate flight. Unable to openly resist the swift and numerous elves, the Petty-Dwarves had no choice but to retreat. They abandoned their shallow surface dwellings and the familiar, winding paths they had carved through the forests. Driven by fear and a growing bitterness, they sought refuge in the deepest, most concealed parts of their ancient, sprawling tunnel networks. Burrowing further into the very heart of the earth they understood so intimately, each crevice, each hidden passage became a sanctuary, a silent testimony to their forced exile. The sunlit world, once a place where they moved with practiced stealth, now became a hostile realm to be avoided, its sounds and sights forever associated with danger. Their isolation deepened, their language grew more guttural, their movements more furtive. The ancient grievance, the profound hurt of being hunted like beasts by those they perceived as shining, powerful invaders, became a scar upon their very souls, shaping their distrust of all other races and sealing their fate as the outcasts of Middle-earth. The laughter of the Eldar, sharp as splintered ice, faded behind the fleeing Nojith Niben as they sought the ancient refuge of the earth. Deeper and deeper they burrowed, not merely seeking shelter, but retreating into the very memory of their people, into the stony heart of the world that had always offered them solace. The entrances to their dwellings, once merely discreet, became almost indistinguishable from the surrounding rock and root, cleverly concealed with overhanging mosses and carefully placed stones. Within these shadowed thresholds, the harsh light of the outer world dimmed, replaced by the soft, flickering glow of fungal lamps and the muted echo of dripping water. Here, the frantic pace of flight gave way to the slow, deliberate rhythm of underground life, a comfort woven into the very fabric of their being. They moved with a quiet purpose, their rough hands tracing familiar paths through the cool, damp passages. Each turn and chamber a testament to generations of hidden existence. This was their true realm, far from the swift, bright beings of the surface. Within the cool embrace of the deep earth, the Petty-Dwarves carved out an existence born of necessity and ancient knowledge. Their tools, simple yet effective, were fashioned from sharpened stone and hardened wood, or sometimes from the very rock they excavated. Unlike the grand halls that other dwarf folk would one day hew, their chambers were intimate and low-ceilinged, shaped more by the natural contours of the rock than by grand design. Yet each served a clear purpose. Small communal fires, kept low and smoldering, provided warmth and a faint, smoky light around which families gathered. Here, the low murmur of their guttural tongues was a soothing constant, weaving tales of old grievances and the slow, patient work of their hands. They developed a unique reverence for the stone itself, not merely as a dwelling, but as a living skin of the world, a protective parent against the unknown dangers above. Their lives were a quiet testament to endurance, a slow, deliberate turning of the earth's silent gears. Generations spent beneath the earth had subtly altered the Petty-Dwarves. Their eyes, accustomed to the gloom, became preternaturally sharp, capable of discerning the slightest shifts in shadow or the faint phosphorescence of rare minerals. Their skin, less touched by sun, grew darker, and their forms became even more squat and broad, ideally suited for navigating tight passages. They moved with a peculiar quietness, their thick-soled feet finding purchase on slick rock with uncanny grace, a silence born of necessity in a world where sound could betray. The scent of damp earth and stone was their constant companion, and their sense of touch became exquisitely refined, feeling the subtle vibrations of the world through the bedrock. This slow transformation, a deepening of their bond with the subterranean, further distinguished them from their distant kin, the true dwarves, who would later come from the east with their grander designs and greater numbers. The isolation forged a unique people, hardy and self-reliant, whose grievances began to harden like the very stone they called home. For these were the Avari dwarves, as some scholars would later name them, the earliest of their kind to awaken and wander westwards. They knew the deep places of Beleriand long before any elven foot trod its green valleys. Their kinship with the stone was profound, their bodies seeming to flow with its contours, their movements as silent as a falling leaf upon the damp earth. The cold embrace of the rock was their solace, its silent wisdom their only guide through the vast, dark caverns beneath the sunlit lands. Then came the unsettling change. Echoes, faint at first, then growing, of swift, tall beings moving through the forests above. These were the elves, stirring from their slumber in the east journeying towards the far western shores, to the Petty-Dwarves, peering from shadowed crags, or listening from deep within their stone-laced homes. These newcomers were figures of dread. Bright, unpredictable, and quick as deer, they seemed to command the very sunlight, alien to the deep earth dwellers who cherished the quiet dark. The elves, accustomed to their own grace and the beauty of the natural world, saw only grotesque caricatures of themselves in these short, dark, rough-skinned folk. They called them Nojith Niben, the Petty-Dwarves, or simply Niben Nogrim, the small dwarves, mistaking their ancient lineage for a lesser form. Sometimes, when a petty dwarf was seen scurrying through the woods, they were hunted like animals. Their unique camouflage and quiet ways mistaken for cunning beastcraft rather than ancient knowledge. Thus, the shadow of fear deepened into a bitter grievance, passed down through generations in the low murmur of their hidden halls. The arrival of the bright folk, the Quendi, stirred a deep, primal fear within the petty dwarves. Their initial reaction was not aggression, but a profound retreat. They drew back from the forest edges and shallow caves, burrowing deeper into the earth, seeking solace in the absolute dark that had always been their sanctuary. Each faint echo of elven song, each rustle of leaves stirred by swift, unseen passages, drove them further from the surface world. They knew the veins of Beleriand's stone intimately, the hidden passages, and the silent, forgotten rivers that flowed beneath the green lands. These pathways, known only to their kind, became their final refuge, a labyrinth of safety against the unsettling light above. They moved with a quiet urgency, their small, calloused hands tracing familiar contours in the ancient rock, each shift a deliberate, practiced movement away from perceived threat. Deep within the earth, far from the sun's reach, their settlements took on a quiet, determined resilience. Their chambers were not grand, but functional, carved by generations of patient hands, echoing the very structure of the rock formations they inhabited. Each nook and cranny served a purpose, storing the meager provisions they gathered or the rudimentary tools they fashioned. The air was cool and still, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant mineral springs. Here, the slow rhythm of their lives continued, punctuated only by the soft scrape of stone on stone, the gentle tap of a hammer, or the low, guttural hum of their ancient songs. Their understanding of the world was rooted entirely in the stone. It was their home, their sustenance, and their silent, unyielding guardian against the chaotic, bright world above. These hidden strongholds, later known as Nojith Niben by the Sindar, held secrets older than memory. The petty dwarves carried within them the lore of Beleriand's geological past, tales of the earth's ancient convulsions, and the whispers of vast, subterranean networks unknown to any other folk. They navigated by instinct and generations of accumulated knowledge, charting the flow of underground waters, and the richest veins of ore long before the Noldor ever dreamed of crafting mithril. Their fear of the elves slowly hardened into a bitter, deep-seated resentment. They saw themselves as the true firstcomers, the rightful inheritors of these ancient lands, now dispossessed and driven into deeper shadows by beings who understood neither the silent wisdom of the stone nor the true weight of time. The retreat into the deep earth transformed the Petty-Dwarves. Their eyes, once accustomed to the muted light of dawn and dusk, grew to perceive the subtlest shifts in shadow, discerning shapes in what others would call absolute dark. Their other senses sharpened too. The whisper of an underground stream miles away, the subtle tremor of distant stone settling, the faint metallic tang of newly exposed ore. Their hands, nimble and strong, learned to navigate the labyrinthine tunnels by touch alone, developing an intimate knowledge of every cool curve and rough surface. They fashioned tools from the hardest flint and obsidian, guided by the echo of their hammers, creating not just implements for survival, but also crude, powerful weapons for defense. Their silent skill in tracking game through subterranean passages, or finding hidden veins of precious minerals, became legend amongst their own kind, a testament to their quiet resilience in the face of forced isolation. Deep within these hidden abodes, their history was not inscribed on parchment or sung under the open sky, but etched into the living rock itself. Simple pictograms, carved with flint knives, and sometimes rubbed with glowing minerals, adorned certain sacred chambers, telling tales of their ancestors, their long journeys, and the vast, silent network of tunnels they had explored. These were not grand murals, but humble, essential records, their narratives understood through generations of quiet retelling. Their songs, low and guttural, were not for celebration, but for remembering the mapping of ancient paths, the properties of hidden herbs, the names of forgotten kin, each verse a thread in the tapestry of their collective memory. Through these means, the Petty-Dwarves maintained a profound, if isolated, connection to their past, ensuring that their grievances, too, would be remembered. Yet even in their deepest sanctuaries, the memory of the bright folk above lingered like a distant, unsettling tremor. Occasionally, a faint echo, carried by the subtle currents of the underground air, would reach them. A fragment of an elven song, softer than a moth's wing, or the inexplicable scent of strange blossoms drifting from a long-forgotten surface vent. These were not direct encounters, but whispers from a world they had abandoned, igniting a quiet, smoldering resentment. They perceived these subtle intrusions not as innocent sounds, but as reminders of what they had lost, the forest edges and shallow caves that were once theirs. It was a grievance born not of conflict, but of forced displacement, a silent wound in the heart of their ancient, stone-bound existence, growing quietly with with each passing year. Welcome back to Middle-earth for sleep. Tonight, we journey gently into the ancient world of Tolkien and explore the deep lore that shaped it. Close your eyes, breathe slowly, and let the story carry you across the wide lands of Middle-earth, though their own tongue held a name of pride and deep meaning. A secret passed down through generations of quiet retellings. The wider world would come to know them by the elven term, the Nojith Niben, or Petty-Dwarves. It was a name not of their choosing, nor one that honored their ancient lineage, but rather a reflection of how they were perceived by the new peoples who would one day dwell in the lands of Beleriand, long before the great mansions of the dwarves were hewn in the misty mountains or the blue, and eons before the Sindar elves awoke under the starlit sky of Beleriand. These first kin had already wandered west. They were the pioneers, the earliest of their race to journey into the wild, untamed lands of what would later be called Beleriand. Their ancestors had stirred from their long sleep in the deep earth and had chosen a path less traveled, pushing ever westward, following the veins of ore and the whispers of unseen passages, settling in places untouched by even the oldest trees. They built no grand halls, but rather found comfort and shelter in the natural caverns and crevices of the earth, shaping them with patience rather than force. Their settlements were not designed for outward grandeur, but for deep concealment, blending almost seamlessly with the natural rock formations and overgrown slopes. Moss and ancient ivy often clung to the entrances of their dwellings, providing both camouflage and a quiet beauty that suited their isolated existence. Within these humble abodes, their lives were lived in quiet rhythm with the earth, their tools primitive but effective, their knowledge of the subterranean world unparalleled. The very stone around them was a living companion, each fissure and crystal vein a familiar feature, comforting in its unchanging presence. They sought not to dominate their surroundings, but to integrate with them, becoming another silent, watchful part of the ancient landscape. They were the masters of subtle adaptation, their homes not chiseled monuments to their own will, but rather patient extensions of the earth's existing forms. Through generations, they learned to read the stone like an open book, finding the natural weaknesses, the ancient fault lines, and the hidden channels where water once flowed, hollowing them further with simple, effective tools of flint and antler. These were not grand halls, but intimate, winding passages, chambers smoothed by countless hands and feet, often lined with woven moss or dried leaves, holding the earth's cool embrace in summer and its steady warmth in winter. Their hearths were carefully placed to draw smoke through natural vents, leaving no trace to disturb the quiet air outside, a testament to their deep respect for the land. Their lore was not written on parchment, but etched into memory, passed down in the low hum of their voices, detailing the properties of every stone every root, every trickle of water that found its way into their hidden abodes. They knew the taste of the different minerals and the subtle shimmer of the earth's slow breath. It was through this innate connection that they learned to extract pigments from deep clays, or to find the tough, pliable woods from which they fashioned their bows and spears, and to craft the simple, yet potent, poisons for their arrow tips. Their wealth was not in gold or gems, but in this profound, practical knowledge of the world beneath and around them, a wisdom that was woven into the very fabric of their daily existence. This profound knowledge, however, came with a cost: isolation. For ages, they moved through Beleriand like phantoms, unseen by the great trees that lit Valinor, and unheard by the whispers of the nascent forests. They grew accustomed to solitude, to the quiet companionship of the rock and the soil, and their forms grew hardened, their faces weathered by the forgotten sun and ancient winds. Their voices, when raised, were guttural, designed to resonate in stone chambers, not to carry across open plains. This distinct way of being, a legacy of their early westward wanderings, set them apart, subtly but irrevocably, from the kin they had left behind, and from any new peoples who might one day venture into their silent world. Welcome back to Middle-earth for sleep. Tonight, we journey gently into the ancient world of Tolkien and explore the deep lore that shaped it. Close your eyes, breathe slowly, and let the story carry you across the wide lands of Middle-earth. The profound, practical knowledge of the Petty-Dwarves, woven into the very fabric of their daily existence, was born of an immense antiquity, far predating the arrival of the elves from the great journey. These were the Nojith-Niben, the small dwarves, as they would later be called, though they knew themselves by older, deeper names long forgotten by others, murmuring them only amongst their kin in the deepest quiet. They were the first of their kind to awaken and wander westward across the vast, unbroken lands, drawn by the whispers of the earth itself, long before the grander mansions of their eastern kin were even dreamt of beneath the distant Red Mountains. Their settlements were not easily found by chance, for their dwellings were often natural caves, enhanced with the barest minimum of alteration, so subtle that they seemed mere outcroppings of the very rock itself. Smooth stones for sitting, flat ledges for sleeping, and small, cunningly placed hearths that vented smoke through natural fissures high above. These were the primary marks of their presence, unlike their later, more ambitious kin, who carved vast halls and delved deep for precious metals and glittering gems. The Petty-Dwarves sought only sustainment and profound solitude. Their lives were dictated by the slow, deliberate rhythm of the seasons, by the quiet movements of deer and boar through the deep, ancient forests, by the gentle growth of root and berry, and by the eternal pulse of the earth they lived within. They spoke a tongue of their own, ancient, and guttural, rarely heard by outsiders, for they were exceedingly wary, having learned caution from long ages of solitary survival amidst the world's untamed wildness. They knew the subtle sense of an approaching storm from the almost imperceptible changes in the cavern air, and could sense the tremor of distant feet from the very stone beneath their rough-hewn sandals. This enduring wisdom also meant a deep, unbroken memory, passed down not in scrolls or grand sagas carved into stone, but in the low, rhythmic hum of their voices around a small, carefully contained fire. Their lore chronicled the passage of millennia, a perspective far longer than that of the emerging elven civilizations, who would one day deem them savage and insignificant. They remembered the first stirrings of the world, the slow shaping of the mountains, and the patient growth of the primordial forests that now towered above their hidden abodes, filtering the starlight into soft, dappled patterns. Their grievances, which would eventually become the core of their forgotten tales, began subtly, long before any formal conflicts or direct encounters. They were, after all, the first to walk these western lands, the first to find comfort and shelter in the deep places of the earth, and they believed themselves to be the rightful, if humble, inheritors of Beleriand's quiet, beating heart. Their claims were not of dominion or conquest, but of peaceful habitation, of a quiet right to simply be in the places they had known for countless ages, their roots intertwined with the very soil. Petty-Dwarves, then, were the quiet pulse of Beleriand, dwelling there in an antiquity so profound that the very stones seemed to remember their first steps. Their settlements, though sparse, were spread across the vast and unbroken lands, each family group maintaining a secluded domain known only to themselves and the watchful forest creatures. They moved through the deep woods like shadows, their rough-hewn sandals barely disturbing the moss or leaf litter, leaving little trace of their passage. The air within their subtly enhanced natural caves carried the comforting, timeless aroma of damp earth and ancient wood smoke, a scent deeply ingrained into their being. Unlike their kin in the distant east, the Nojith Niben held no desire for glittering veins of gold or the brilliance of polished gems. Their true treasures were the living forests, the clear, cold springs that bubbled from the earth, and the rich, seasonal bounty of the forest floor. With patient hands, they gathered wild berries, edible roots, and precious fungi, storing them in cunningly woven baskets or small, hidden caches deep within their earthen homes. Their tools, crafted from flint, wood, and bone, were crude, yet perfectly suited to their quiet, sustainable lives. Each day a slow, deliberate dance with the rhythms of the ancient world. Through countless, unrecorded generations, these small dwellers had charted every twisting path of stream and every hidden hollow beneath the oldest trees. Their memories were not of grand histories or epic deeds, but of the very land itself, the whisper of forgotten springs, the subtle sense that heralded changes in weather, the ancient scars on the mountainsides. They knew where the safest shelters lay when sudden storms swept through the hills, and which deep caves offered warmth in the bitterest winters. Yet, as the slow ages turned, a new ethereal sound began to stir in the western lands. A faint song carried on the unseen winds, something unknown to the silent, ancient earth. Welcome back to Middle-earth for sleep. Tonight, we journey gently into the ancient world of Tolkien and explore the deep lore that shaped it. Close your eyes, breathe slowly, and let the story carry you across the wide lands of Middle-earth. The world then was young, its vast forests stretching unbroken, its mountains unscarred by the pickaxes of later ages. In this primordial Beleriand, long before the sun and moon, before the awakening of elves or the arrival of men, the Petty-Dwarves already walked. They were the oldest intelligent folk in the western lands, their very presence woven into the fabric of the ancient earth itself. Their history was not recorded on scrolls of vellum or etched into grand monuments, but rather lived in the slow, persistent memory of the stones they inhabited, and the deep, silent wisdom passed down through generations in the echoing quiet of their hidden dwellings. Their homes were never the grand, pillar-lined halls of their eastern kin, nor were they crude camps beneath the open sky. Instead, they were subtle enhancements of nature itself, deep, winding fissures in the rock, naturally formed caves, widened and smoothed by patient hands. Their entrances often obscured by thick ivy or cunningly placed stones. These were not mines dug for wealth, but sanctuaries shaped for survival, each passage leading deeper into the cool, silent heart of the earth. Here, the air was always still, faintly scented with damp earth and the unique, sweet tang of underground fungi, a calming embrace against the wild world outside. Their subterranean networks were less a grand architecture and more a respectful integration into the world's natural veins. Yet this quiet existence, so ancient and undisturbed, was not destined to remain so. In the long ages that followed their solitary wandering, a new people awakened under the stars, the elves, tall and fair, their voices like music, their eyes keen and bright. But these firstborn, new to the world, had never before encountered beings like the Nojith Niben when they first glimpsed the Petty-Dwarves, short and dark, moving like shadows through the twilight forests. They saw not intelligent folk, but rather strange, misshapen beasts, creatures of the dark earth, akin to the orcs they knew to fear. And so, tragically, the elves began to hunt them, driving them deeper into their hidden tunnels, instilling in the hearts of the Petty-Dwarves a profound and enduring fear, and a bitter, ancient grievance that would shape their fate for millennia. Their forms were unlike the sturdy, broad-shouldered dwarves of later renown. Squatter, their limbs thick and powerful, their skin often bearing the muted tones of the rock they lived among. They moved with a peculiar, shuffling gait, low to the ground, almost like the very stones themselves had stirred and walked. Their beards, sparse and unkempt, were less a symbol of pride and more a natural camouflage, blending with the moss and lichen that clung to the damp cave walls. Each step they took was an ancient whisper, a soft scuff of hardened hide upon ancient stone, leaving scarcely a trace in the deep quietude of their chosen paths. Their eyes, though keen, often held a distant, wary gaze, reflecting countless ages of solitude and deep memory. These were the Nojith-Niben, the Petty-Dwarves, the gnarled folk, as they would later be called by the newly awakened elves. But in this epoch, they simply were an intrinsic part of the ancient earth. Their knowledge of the earth's secrets ran deeper than any other folk, for they had witnessed the mountains rise and the rivers carve their paths. Their intricate tunnels, often no more than widened natural fissures, stretched for leagues beneath the silent forests, connecting secluded chambers, cool water springs, and hidden foraging grounds. They mapped the world by the subtle changes in stone temperature, the distant echoes of underground rivers, and the faint, sweet scent of mineral veins. A living map etched into their very beings, guiding them through the dark for generations beyond counting. Their lives unfolded in this deep quietude, marked only by the slow drip of water, the soft scuttle of unseen creatures, and the quiet rhythm of their own breath. The world above was a distant rumor, a place of rustling leaves and shifting shadows, rarely visited and always with caution, their movements deliberate and guarded. Yet, even in the deepest chambers, a subtle shift began to stir, a tremor not of the earth's making, a faint, unfamiliar echo on the currents of the deep winds that sometimes found their way into the outer passages. The ancient silence, though still profound, was no longer entirely unbroken, hinting at a world preparing to awaken to new voices and new steps upon its surface, a change they felt rather than heard. The Nojith-Niben, these gnarled folk, were the silent, solitary custodians of Beleriand's hidden heart long before the first age was named by others. They delved not for wealth, but for shelter and understanding, their crude pix-shaping tunnels that echoed the land's own veins. Their settlements were not cities, but quiet burrows within the living rock, marked by the simplest of carved symbols, a winding route, a watchful eye, symbols of their deep reverence for the earth. The air within these ancient abodes was cool and still, carrying the faint, metallic scent of damp stone and the comforting warmth of hidden geothermal springs. Their days were measured by the slow drip of water through rock, the deep hum of the earth, and the faint, rhythmic pulse of their own quiet lives, a silent symphony in the deep dark. They knew every fissure, every secret spring, every vein of precious stone, not as treasure, but as an integral part of their world, within the shadows of what would one day be known as the caverns of Nargothrond, or the labyrinthine depths beneath the Andram. The Petty-Dwarves had long found their most secluded havens. These were not grand halls, but a sprawling network of interconnected chambers, some natural, some gently widened, often with roots and moss intertwining with their crude structural supports. Life here was one of profound quietude, marked only by the rustle of foraging for edible fungi, the soft chipping of stone, and the distant, muted roar of underground rivers. Their voices, when they spoke, were low murmurs, almost swallowed by the vast silence, a language born of observation and the deep wisdom of the earth. They moved with a stealth that made them almost invisible even in their own dimly lit domains, leaving little more than a memory of a shadow passing across a moss-covered wall. Welcome back to Middle-earth for sleep. Tonight, we journey gently into the ancient world of Tolkien and explore the deep lore that shaped it. Close your eyes, breathe slowly, and let the story carry you across the wide lands of Middle-earth. From the quiet shadows, a different sort of dwarf emerged, not the grand builders of Khazad-dûm, nor the formidable smiths of the Blue Mountains, but the Nojith-Niben, the Petty-Dwarves. They were the first of their kind to awaken in Beleriand, long before the Sindar ever called it home. Their earliest ancestors, having wandered westward through the gloom long ages past, shorter and squatter than their eastern kin, with skin often darkened by earth and sun, and beards coarse and untamed. They moved through the deep places with an innate understanding of stone, their very presence a muted echo of the earth's ancient breath. Their paths were worn smooth by countless generations, leading through twisting passages where few other beings dared to tread. Their craftsmanship, unlike the intricate artistry of later dwarves, was born of necessity and deep reverence for the living rock. They shaped the stone not with grand designs, but with crude yet effective tools, coaxing shelter from the earth and marking their passages with symbols that spoke of root systems and watchful eyes, signs of their silent pact with the land. These were not fortresses, but humble burrows, often widened natural fissures, where roots and fungal growths intertwined with their simple structural supports. The air within these hidden havens carried the faint, metallic scent of damp stone, mingled with the earthy aroma of edible fungi they cultivated in dim, damp grottos. Their knowledge of subterranean currents, hidden geothermal springs, and geological veins was encyclopedic, a legacy passed down through generations, not in books, but in the very rhythm of their lives. For countless silent centuries, they dwelt in profound solitude, their low murmurs rarely echoing beyond the confines of their sprawling, interconnected chambers beneath the ancient hills of Beleriand. They were so deeply integrated with the very fabric of the earth that they became almost indistinguishable from the shadows they inhabited. Their movements, a whisper across moss-covered walls before the high elves ever set foot in Middle-earth, and before the Sindar awoke to the starlight in the forests of Doriath. The Petty-Dwarves were already there, the land's original, silent custodians. Their existence was a secret held close by the earth itself, a slow, deep breath in the darkness, measured only by the endless drip of water through stone, and the faint, comforting warmth of hidden geothermal springs. Their world was one of quiet observation and deep, unwavering patience, a precursor to all that would follow. While the Petty-Dwarves lived in their ancient harmony, a subtle shift began to whisper through the roots and stones of Beleriand. New presences, tall and luminous, began to walk the surface world. These were the Sindar, the Grey Elves, who had wandered westward from the great journey, coming at last to these green and shadowed lands. To the Petty-Dwarves, dwelling deep below, these newcomers were not just unknown, but felt like a tremor in their long-established peace, a strange light filtering into their accustomed gloom. Their keen senses, accustomed to the slow pulse of the earth, registered this arrival as a profound disruption. The Sindar, unaware that any intelligent beings other than themselves and their Vanyar and Noldor kin existed in these lands, mistook the Petty-Dwarves for strange, shy beasts of the wild. Their crude tools and simple shelters, often hidden beneath natural outcroppings, offered no clear sign of sentient craftsmanship to the elves' eyes. Accustomed to the grander works of their own people, or the Noldor, these animals were often glimpsed as swift, shadowy forms darting through the undergrowth, or vanishing into unseen holes, making them targets for an occasional hunt, not out of malice, but from a profound ignorance. The forests, once their sanctuary, now held a new, unpredictable danger. This misunderstanding bore a bitter fruit. For generations, the Petty-Dwarves endured this casual cruelty. They learned to shun the light even more, retreating further into the deepest, most shadowed places, their natural wariness hardening into a deep-seated fear and resentment of the big folk who roamed the surface. They were driven from ancient pathways, their humble burrows disturbed, and their numbers dwindled. The quiet echoes of their lives, once undisturbed, became tinged with the constant vigilance of the hunted. The elves, in their youthful glory, had forged the first, enduring grievance in the hearts of the Nojith Niben. The subtle shift deepened into a tremor for the Nojith Niben, the Petty-Dwarves. Their ancient tunnels, once pathways for foraging and quiet exploration, now became havens of retreat. The unfamiliar scent of the tall folk lingered in the breezes that drifted down into their shallower delvings, a pungent reminder of danger. Each rustle in the leaves above, each distant call that echoed through the trees was now meticulously catalogued by their heightened senses. They learned to seal off peripheral passages with cunningly placed stones and camouflaged earth, creating dead ends and deceptive turns. The faint, rhythmic thrum of the earth itself, a language they understood intimately, began to carry new, unsettling vibrations. The light, rapid footfalls of the surface dwellers, so different from the slow, deliberate tread of the beasts they knew. Up on the surface, the Sindar continued their daily lives, charting the beauty of Beleriand, their voices carrying through the quiet glades. They sought game for sustenance, hunted wolves and other predators to protect their nascent settlements, and in their explorations occasionally encountered the fleeting shadows of the Nojeth Niben. To the elves, these creatures were curious, swift, and wild, never quite seen clearly, but glimpsed as dark blurs vanishing into the shadows or slipping into crevices in the rock. Their simple traps, intended for smaller, furred creatures of the forest, sometimes caught a petty dwarf, leading to confusion, and from the elven perspective, a regrettable discovery of another strange, shy beast that had stumbled into their snares. The elves, accustomed to the grander, more obvious signs of civilization, found no evidence of sentience in the rough tools or crude shelters they might occasionally stumble upon. They merely saw the raw, untamed wilderness and its denizens, utterly blind to the deep, complex history that burrowed beneath their feet. This profound misunderstanding, born of ignorance rather than malice, inflicted wounds that festered in the quiet hearts of the Petty-Dwarves. As the seasons turned, the encounters, though rare, etched themselves deeply into the communal memory of the Nojeth Niben. They spoke in hushed tones of the Starfolk, a name whispered with a mix of fear and growing resentment. The elves, with their effortless grace and bright eyes, represented an intrusion into lands the petty dwarves had called home since before memory. Every lost kin, every damaged dwelling, every forced retreat deeper into the earth became a thread woven into a tapestry of grievance. Their ancient knowledge of the earth, once a source of comfort and security, now became a tool for deeper concealment, for crafting more elaborate traps for their own protection, and for mapping paths of escape from the surface world. The simple tools they used for digging and foraging were sharpened, not just for utility, but with a defensive edge. Welcome back to Middle-earth for sleep. Tonight, we journey gently into the ancient world of Tolkien and explore the deep lore that shaped it. Close your eyes, breathe slowly, and let the story carry you across the wide lands of Middle-earth, from the quiet resentment of the petty dwarves. A new, more reclusive way of life, slowly but inexorably solidified. The repeated, unintentional slights from the elves, perceived as malicious hunts and dismissive ignorance, pushed the Nojeth Niben deeper into the earth, severing any lingering desire for connection with the surface world. Their ancient, rudimentary dwellings, once mere shelters from weather and beasts, transformed into more intricate, yet still crude, fortresses of solitude. Within these deep, forgotten delves, the Nojith-Niben cultivated a singular, profound knowledge of the earth. Their senses, already attuned to the subtle shifts of stone and soil, grew even sharper, allowing them to navigate complex subterranean labyrinths by feel and memory alone. They became masters of the smallest sounds, distinguishing the trickle of a distant spring from the scuttling of a cave creature, or the unsettling vibrations of an unseen footfall on the surface far above. Unlike the later dwarves, whose mining was often driven by a desire for mithril and gems, the Petty-Dwarves sought only what was necessary for survival: durable stone for tools, certain minerals for pigments, and underground streams for water. Their tools remained rudimentary, crafted from flint and hardened wood, but were wielded with an almost instinctual precision, born of generations spent in the dark. They learned to cultivate edible fungi that thrived in the sunless depths, and to hunt the blind cave worms and scuttling insects that shared their lightless world, adapting their diet entirely to their harsh environment. Their faces, often smudged with earth and grime, rarely saw the sun, and their eyes, though keen in the dark, held a wistful, almost sorrowful cast when exposed to direct light. This profound isolation, though born of necessity and self-preservation, came at a heavy cost. The numbers of the Nojith-Niben slowly dwindled over the long centuries. They were a people perpetually on the defensive, their lives a constant struggle against a world that either misunderstood or actively threatened them. Their language, the ancient, unique tongue of the Petty-Dwarves, grew rarer, spoken only in hushed tones within their hidden tunnels, never echoing across the vales of Beleriand. Their stories became tales of woe and resentment, passed down from elder to child, reinforcing the bitterness towards the tall folk, the elves, who had driven them from the sunlight. Every elvish lamp that shone in the distant glades, every distant song carried on the wind, was a reminder of their lost heritage, their former freedom.